My mother-in-law was escorted out of the county courthouse in handcuffs. She looked back at me exactly once. I was standing on the steps in a gray blazer I had bought with my first real paycheck, holding a manila folder full of documents that had taken me 14 months to compile. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just watched her go, and for the first time in 4 years, I felt like I could breathe all the way down to the bottom of my lungs. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the beginning, because the beginning matters. The beginning is where I made every mistake a woman in love makes when she believes that being kind and patient and reasonable is enough to fix a broken situation. His name was Warren. I was 27 when we met, working as a paralegal at a small firm in Charlotte. He came in for a consultation about a property dispute, something about a boundary line between his land and his neighbors, and he was nervous in that way that men who are used to being competent become nervous when they're suddenly out of their depth. He kept apologizing for not understanding the paperwork. I told him that's what I was there for. He laughed, and his whole face changed when he laughed. We had coffee 3 days later. We were engaged 18 months after that. I want to be honest about who Warren was, because it's easy to make him into a villain, and he wasn't quite that. He was kind in small ways, the kind of man who remembered that you liked your tea with no sugar, who would pull over to let a funeral procession pass even when he was running late. He was also, fundamentally, a man who had never once in his 31 years of life said a hard thing to his mother. And his mother had built her entire existence around that fact. Her name was Dolores. She was 63, widowed, and she ran the family's small commercial real estate holdings the way a general runs a war, with total information control and zero tolerance for dissent. Warren's father had left behind a portfolio of properties and a trust that, when Warren turned 35, or when he produced a legitimate heir, would release roughly $8 million. Dolores had been managing that trust for 6 years. She had also been living on the income it generated. I didn't know any of this when I married Warren. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. She was polite to me at the engagement party. Coolly. Precisely polite. The way a very good attorney is polite to a witness she intends to destroy. She complimented my dress. She asked about my family, where I was from, what my parents did. When I told her my mother was a school librarian and my father had retired from the postal service, something moved behind her eyes that I recognized but couldn't name yet. I recognize it now. It was calculation. The first year of our marriage, I told myself the tension was normal. New family, new dynamics. I bent myself into shapes I didn't know I could bend, trying to make her like me. I learned how she took her coffee. I sent handwritten thank you notes after every dinner. I laughed at her jokes even when they landed at my expense, little jabs dressed up as teasing, delivered with a smile that dared me to react. Warren always said, "That's just how she is, she means well." I heard that sentence so many times it stopped meaning anything at all. The pregnancy came as a surprise. A good one, at least for me. I was 29, we had been married almost 2 years, and I found out on a Tuesday morning before work. I sat on the edge of the bathtub for a long time just holding the test. Then I called Warren, who was at a job site, and he went so quiet for a moment I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, "Are you serious?" And I could hear him starting to smile through the phone. We decided to tell his mother at Sunday dinner. I see now, looking back, how naive that decision was. But I still believed then that good news could soften something, that a grandchild might be the thing that finally made her let me in. We drove out to her house, a large colonial on 3 acres that the trust had purchased in 2019. And she had cooked a full dinner, which she only did when she wanted something to feel important. Warren's sister was there too. Her name is Francine. She is 4 years younger than Warren and has lived in the house with Dolores since her own divorce 2 years prior. Francine watched everything her mother did and then did it louder. Warren told her after the main course. He was beaming. He reached over and took my hand. Dolores put down her fork. She didn't speak for a moment. Then she said, "How far along?" I told her 7 weeks. She said, "Have you had it confirmed by a doctor?" Warren frowned. "Mom, obviously. I'm asking her," Dolores said, and she looked at me in a way that made the temperature in the room drop several degrees. I told her yes, I had a doctor's appointment scheduled for the following week. She picked up her fork and said, "We'll see." Then she changed the subject entirely and Warren let her because Warren always let her, and I sat there and ate the rest of my pot roast and told myself I had misread the moment. I had not misread the moment. The next 3 weeks were a quiet kind of terrible. Dolores called Warren every day. I wasn't on those calls, but I could tell by the way his voice changed, by the way he started saying things like, "I'm sure it's fine, I'm sure she's fine," into the phone in the kitchen after he thought I was asleep. I asked him once what she was saying and he told me she was just worried, that she had a lot of questions, that I shouldn't take it personally. I want you to understand what it's like to be told not to take something personally when the something in question is your own pregnancy. Then I had a miscarriage at 11 weeks. It was quiet and brutal and private in the way those things are. And I won't describe it more than that because some grief belongs only to the person who lived it. Warren was kind through it. Genuinely kind. The man I had married showing up in full for maybe the first time since the wedding. He held my hand in the hospital. He cried in the car on the way home. For about 2 weeks, I thought maybe this loss had broken something open between us in a useful way, the way sometimes pain can do that. Then his mother called. I was in the bedroom and I wasn't trying to listen, but our house wasn't large. And her voice carries. I heard her say, "Well, now you can start fresh. Properly. Maybe think about whether this is really what you want. Whether this is really what you want." I stood in that bedroom doorway for a long time. I heard Warren say, "Mom," in a low voice. I heard him say, "That's not fair." But I did not hear him say, "Stop." I did not hear him say, "Don't talk about my wife that way." I did not hear him say, "This conversation is over." I went back and sat on the bed. I looked at the wall, and something inside me that had been bending for 2 years went very still and straight. I started keeping records that week. Not because I had a plan yet. I didn't have a plan. Not then. I just knew, in some cellular part of myself, that I needed to document what was happening. I'm a paralegal. Documentation is the language I think in. I started a private journal on a cloud account that only I had access to. Dates, times, what was said, what I observed. I installed a small security camera at the front entrance of our house. Just a standard doorbell camera. Visible, nothing covert. And I noted in my journal when Dolores arrived and how long she stayed, which was, that autumn, increasingly often and increasingly long. I got pregnant again 6 months later. I did not tell Warren's mother. I didn't tell anyone on his side. I told my own mother and I told my best friend from college, Gwen. Wait, I should say, my closest friend because names matter, and she is the kind of person who deserves to be distinguished. I told 2 people I trusted with my life, and I kept going to work, and I did not tell Dolores. Warren wanted to tell her. Of course he did. He said it wasn't right to hide it. I told him I wanted to wait until after the first trimester, which was reasonable, which was medically sound advice, and he accepted that. I watched his face when he accepted it, and I saw relief there too, underneath the compliance. And that told me something about what he already knew and wasn't ready to name. I was 13 weeks when Francine found the prenatal vitamins in the bathroom cabinet. She had come over, unannounced, which was a habit of hers that I had asked Warren to address 4 separate times while I was at work. Warren let her in. This is a fact he has never disputed. She was in our bathroom, which I have also never fully understood, and she found the vitamins, and she called her mother, and her mother called Warren, and Warren called me while I was eating lunch at my desk. His voice was careful in the way it got careful when he was about to tell me something he knew I wouldn't want to hear. He said, "My mom knows." I put down my sandwich. He said, "She wants to talk to you." I said, "No." Silence. I said, "Warren, I need you to hear me right now. I am not ready to talk to her. I will decide when I'm ready to talk to her. This is my pregnancy and I get to decide that." He said, I know, you're right, she's upset." I said, "I don't care." And I hung up, which was the first time in 4 years of knowing Warren that I had hung up on anyone related to him. I sat at my desk with my hands flat on the surface, and I breathed and I thought, with complete clarity, that something was about to break and I had to decide right now whether I was going to try to hold it together or step back and let it fall. Dolores came to our house that evening. I knew she would. Warren had tried to call me twice after the hang-up, and I had texted back that I would be home for dinner and that I needed him to tell his mother not to come, Not tonight, and he had not confirmed either way, which was his own kind of answer. She was sitting in our living room when I got home. Francine was beside her on the couch. Warren was in the chair across from them with the look of a man who has been in a hostage situation for 2 hours and doesn't know which side he's on. I set my bag down. I did not sit. Dolores said she was hurt that I had hidden the pregnancy from her. She said family didn't keep secrets. She said she had a right to know about her grandchild. She used the word right 3 times in 4 sentences, which told me everything I needed to know about how this conversation had been framed before I arrived. I said, calmly, that I had not hidden anything, that I had simply chosen to wait until I was past the first trimester, which any doctor would recommend after a miscarriage. Francine said, she didn't hide it from her own mother. I looked at Francine. I said, you went through my bathroom cabinet. Francine said she was just using the bathroom. I said, you are not welcome in my home without an invitation. That is not a request. The temperature in the room dropped the same way it had that first Sunday dinner, except this time I was the one dropping it, and it felt completely different from the other side. Dolores stood up. She was a tall woman, which she used deliberately. She looked at me and she said, in a voice that was very quiet and very even, you need to understand that this child, if it is indeed Warren's, is entitled to the inheritance from his father's trust. But that trust is contingent on my verification of legitimacy. I want a paternity test before the child is born. I heard Warren inhale sharply. I said, excuse me? She said, I'm sure you understand it's just a formality. I said, get out of my house. She said, Lauren. I said, I want both of you out of my house right now. Warren stood up. I watched him stand up, and I waited to see what he would do with himself. He looked at me and he looked at his mother, and I could see the war happening in real time across his face, the 20 years of habit and the right thing pressing against each other, and he said, Mom, I think you should go. She left. Francine left. Warren closed the door behind them and then stood with his back to me for a moment, and then turned around and said he was sorry. I said, are you going to call her and apologize to her tonight? He didn't answer right away, and that was an answer. I said, I need you to understand something, Warren. I have been patient for 4 years. I have bent and compromised and swallowed things that I should have said. I am not doing that anymore. If you call her tonight to smooth this over, I need you to understand what you are choosing. He said, that's not fair. I said, no. What she just said to me in our living room is not fair. Me asking you to stand beside me is called marriage. I went to bed before he did. I don't know if he called her. I never asked because I already knew. The next 2 months were a cold war. Dolores went quiet, which was somehow worse than when she was loud. Warren and I were functional and careful with each other, 2 people walking around something fragile in the middle of the floor. I kept working. I kept documenting. I also, during those 2 months, did something I hadn't done before. I started reading the trust documents. Warren had copies in his home office. He'd never hidden them from me, exactly. They just hadn't seemed relevant to my daily life. I sat with them on a Saturday afternoon while he was out, and I read them the way I'd been trained to read legal documents, slowly and literally. I was looking for the legitimacy clause Dolores had referenced. I found it. It was real, but it was also narrower than she had made it sound. It required documentation of paternity, yes, but it did not give the trustee the authority to demand a test. That authority rested with the court or with Warren himself, not with his mother. She had no legal standing to demand anything. She had been lying, or at least significantly misrepresenting her position. I sat with that for a long time. Then I opened my journal and wrote down everything I had just read, with page numbers. My daughter was born in February. She was early by 2 weeks, and small and so startlingly real that when they put her on my chest I understood in a way I never had before, what it means to have something worth protecting. Warren cried again, harder than at the miscarriage, a different kind of crying. Something releasing in him that had been held too tight for too long. I held her daughter and I thought, clearly and without drama, whatever happens next, she will never doubt that she was wanted. Dolores asked to be at the hospital. Warren had told her she could come after the birth, during visiting hours, like any other family member. I had insisted on this in writing, a text exchange I had screenshotted. She arrived with Francine and a large flower arrangement, and she stood at the edge of the room and looked at my daughter with an expression I couldn't quite categorize. Not warmth, not exactly coldness either. Something assessing. She said, "She has Warren's nose." I said nothing. She said, "She's beautiful." And then, after a pause, "We should talk about the paternity documentation when you're feeling better." Warren said, "Mom, not today." She said, "Of course, whenever you're ready." And she smiled at me, and I smiled back, and we both knew exactly what was happening. I was back at work 6 weeks later, part-time at first. My mother came to stay with us and helped with the baby, and having her in the house restored something in me, the particular safety of a person who is simply, uncomplainingly on your side. I told her some of what had been happening. Not everything. Enough. She listened without interrupting, which is a skill she has that I have spent years trying to learn. She said, "What do you need?" I said, "I need to understand what I'm actually dealing with." I hired a forensic accountant. I want to be clear that this was not an impulsive decision. I had been building toward this for months, quietly, the way a paralegal builds a case, methodically, without showing your hand. The accountant's name was a man I was referred to through a colleague, and I won't give his name here, but he was thorough in the way that only people who have seen a lot of creative financial management can be thorough. I gave him the trust documents and asked him to look at how the income had been distributed over the past 6 years. What he found took 4 months to fully document. I won't go through all of it because it's complex and because the court documents are public record if you want the details. The summary version is this. Dolores had been paying herself a management fee that was not authorized under the terms of the trust. She had also been routing income through a property management LLC that she controlled personally, which had then invoiced the trust for services at above-market rates. Over 6 years, this amounted to approximately $300,000 that should have gone into the trust, but had instead gone to Dolores. It was not the $8 million. But it was enough. I went to an estate attorney. Then I went to a different one, for a second opinion. Then I sat with Warren at the kitchen table with our daughter asleep and the baby monitor on the counter, and I put the documents in front of him, and I told him everything. He read them slowly. He went through them twice. I watched his face move through disbelief into a kind of terrible recognition. The face of someone who has suspected something for a long time and is finally being shown the proof. He said, "How long have you known?" I said, "I've been building the case for 8 months. I confirmed it 4 months ago." He said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "Because I needed to know what I was dealing with before I handed it to someone who might warn her." He looked up at me. Something moved in his face that I don't know how to name exactly. Hurt, maybe. But also, underneath it, something like respect. He said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to report it. To the court. It's trust fraud." "That's not a choice we get to make, Warren. That's the law." He was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, "She's my mother." I said, "I know she is." He said, "This will destroy her." I said, "She made choices. She made them over 6 years. Every year she could have stopped and she didn't." He didn't say anything else. He closed the folder and put his hands flat on the table and sat there breathing. I waited. I had learned, in 4 years, how to wait for Warren to arrive at the truth. He said, "Okay." We filed with the court 6 weeks later. Dolores's attorney tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, an accounting error, a matter of disputed interpretation of the management fee clause. The forensic accountant's report was not kind to that argument. The estate attorney was not kind to it either. Francine, faced with the possibility of being named as a secondary beneficiary of the improper payments, retained her own attorney within 48 hours and promptly provided testimony that did not help her mother's case. I want to say something about that because I think it's important. The thing about people who have built their lives around control is that they have not, in the process, built genuine loyalty. They have built compliance, and compliance evaporates the moment the consequences become real. Dolores had spent 63 years being the most powerful person in every room she entered, and when the room changed, she found out very quickly how alone she actually was. The proceeding took 7 months. There was a separate criminal referral for the fraud that moved more slowly, but it moved. My daughter was 14 months old the day I stood on those courthouse steps and watched Dolores leave in handcuffs. It was a Tuesday, which felt right somehow. Tuesday is an ordinary day. There's nothing dramatic about a Tuesday. It's just the day that things happen. Warren and I had separated by then. We had tried, for about 6 months after the filing, to hold the marriage together. I want to be honest about this too. He was not a bad man during those 6 months. He went to therapy. He said the things he should have said years earlier. He was present with our daughter in a way he hadn't fully been before. I believed that he meant it, and I believe it still. But meaning it wasn't enough to fix what had been built on a broken foundation. Some structures, once they show you how they were made, cannot be unmade into something else. You can patch and reinforce and try your hardest, and they will hold for a while, and then one day you will feel the floor shift underfoot, and you will know. We divorced 14 months after the filing. It was quiet. We had a mediator, and we were, to our credit, decent to each other throughout it. He lives 20 minutes from me now. He sees our daughter every week. He is a better father than he was a husband, which is perhaps the best outcome available. I kept my job at the firm for another year after the divorce, then left to join a smaller practice that specializes in estate litigation. The forensic accountant who had worked on our case referred me to a colleague who was looking for a senior paralegal with experience in trust law. I had that experience now. I had earned it the hard way. My mother says I have her father's stubbornness. She means it as a compliment, mostly. I used to feel like stubbornness was a flaw, something you were supposed to round off and smooth over in the interest of keeping the peace. I don't feel that way anymore. I think stubbornness, properly aimed, is just endurance with direction. It's the refusal to accept that the version of things someone else has decided upon is the only version available. My daughter will be 3 in February. She has Warren's nose and, I am told, my grandmother's eyes, which is a combination I find unexpectedly moving. She currently believes that dogs are called woof-woofs and that the moon follows our car when we drive at night, and both of these things seem correct to me. She has no idea, and will not for many years, what it costs to make her world safe. I am at peace with that. It is not a cost I regret. Dolores received a sentence of 18 months, of which she served 14. The trust was recalculated and recertified by a court-appointed administrator. Warren turned 35 last year and the disbursement processed without incident. His share came to him clean, finally, without strings or conditions. And I know this because he texted me to say thank you, which is a strange thing to receive and also, somehow, the right thing. I've thought a lot about why it took me as long as it did. 4 years is a long time to bend. I had all the skills, the legal literacy, the instinct for documentation, the ability to read a contract. What I didn't have for a long time was the belief that I was allowed to use those skills in my own defense. I had been taught the way most women are taught in ways so quiet they barely register as teaching, that using your full intelligence on your own behalf is somehow aggressive, that protecting yourself is the same thing as attacking someone else. It is not. That is a lie told to keep capable women small. I still have the journal. All 14 months of it. I'll never publish it and I'll probably delete it eventually. But right now it sits in my cloud account and sometimes I open it and read an entry from the first year, and I feel a kind of compassion for the woman who wrote it. The woman who was so careful, so patient, so determined to be fair, that I didn't feel for her at the time. She was doing her best with what she had. She just didn't yet know what she had. Now I do. If you are currently in a situation where your best efforts to be reasonable are being used as evidence that you'll accept anything, I want you to hear this. Being reasonable is a strength. Knowing how to document is a strength. Knowing when to stop waiting for someone else to do the right thing, and doing it yourself. That is also a strength. You are not obligated to keep bending to protect someone else from the consequences of their own choices. The peace I live in now is not something that was given to me. It is something I built, piece by piece, starting from a Tuesday morning with a prenatal vitamin bottle and a growing understanding of what I was actually dealing with. That's what restoration looks like in my experience. Not a single dramatic moment, not one confrontation that changes everything, just the long, quiet, determined work of building something real from what you've salvaged. And one ordinary Tuesday, standing in the sun outside a courthouse, breathing all the way down. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe to Restoration Stories. There are more of them, and they are all true, and they all come from women who refused to stay small. Leave me a comment. Have you ever had to fight for yourself in a situation where no one else would? I read every single one. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what actually makes a person do what Dolores did, not the legal piece. I understand the legal piece now better than most. I mean the human piece. How do you spend 6 years quietly siphoning money that belongs to your own son from a trust your late husband built and tell yourself every single morning that you're the one holding the family together? I think the answer is that people who operate the way she did don't experience what they're doing as theft. They experience it as compensation. For what they've sacrificed. For what they've managed. For being the one who stayed, who handled things, who kept the structure intact while everyone else just lived their lives inside it. The entitlement runs so deep it stops feeling like entitlement and starts feeling like fairness. And anyone who threatens that arrangement, anyone who asks questions, who reads the documents, who refuses to simply accept the version of reality being offered, becomes the enemy. Not because they've done anything wrong, because they've made the wrong visible. That's what I was to Dolores. Not a daughter-in-law she disliked, a threat she needed to neutralize. What I keep coming back to, though, is my own peace in it. Because I was not passive by nature. I had the skills. I had the instincts. I had, sitting in Warren's home office, a full set of trust documents that I could have read in year 1. I didn't read them until year 4, not because I couldn't, but because I had been so focused on being acceptable, on being the kind of woman who doesn't make things complicated, that I had pointed all of that capability away from my own life. That is the thing I want to say clearly because I think it's the thing that actually matters here. Intelligence without the willingness to use it in your own defense is not really intelligence at all. It's just a tool you've agreed not to pick up. And the people around you who benefit from your restraint will never tell you to pick it up. They will call your restraint grace. They will call it maturity. They will say you're so reasonable, so patient, such a stabilizing presence. What they mean is, thank you for not looking too closely. Warren was not a bad man, and I believe that. But his goodness existed inside a very comfortable passivity. He cared about the right things when the cost of caring was low. When the cost went up, he hesitated, and in those hesitations, his mother operated. That's not villainy. That's a failure of a different kind. The failure of someone who knew what was right and kept finding reasons to wait. I do not carry anger about it anymore. What I carry is clarity. Clarity about what I will accept and what I won't. Clarity about the difference between keeping the peace and keeping yourself. Clarity about the fact that the people who ask you to be reasonable in situations that are not reasonable are asking you to absorb their consequences, and that is not a request you are required to honor. Dolores made her choices freely, over years, and the outcome she received was the direct result of those choices. Not punishment from anywhere outside herself, just reality, arriving on schedule, the way it always does for people who believe the rules don't apply to them. And I made my choices too. The years of bending, and then the year of not bending, and everything that followed. I live with all of it. I'd make the same final choices again without hesitation. My daughter doesn't know any of this yet. She will, someday, in some age-appropriate version of it. What I want her to understand, when she's old enough, is not the drama of what happened. It's this, that her mother read the documents, that she asked the questions, that she did not wait to be given permission to protect her own life. That is the only inheritance I am certain I can give her, and I think it might be the most useful one.